All right, everyone, welcome to class. I hope this video goes really well for you. C period, say hi. Hi. There you go. Okay, they're going to play along with us live. You poor people who are watching this video online, sorry, you don't get as much fun as these people get. As always, we're just going to do this just like we did last time. We're going to have a question, we're going to have answers. I'm going to slowly remove answers. Now, I don't have as many questions this time through. The major idea behind that is I want you to hear why the wrong answers are not the case. And so I'll slowly remove them. I'm not going to waste time with a scoring system or anything like this. Do what works best for you. Pay attention, and hopefully you will do well. And let's get started. I have a couple of questions, but remember to listen for the wrong answers and why the wrong answers are as such. So here we go. Question 1 out of the gate. Who was the bishop of the New World who personally knew Columbus and fought against slavery? Who was the bishop of the New World who knew Columbus and fought against slavery? Was it A, Peter Claver, B, Bartholomew de las Casas? Sorry, C period, I know it's hard to see that. C, Francisco Pizarro, or D, Junipero Serra? Who is the bishop of the New World who knew Columbus and was against slavery? Well, let's get rid of some of the obvious answers first. It's definitely not Pizarro. Pizarro was a conquistador. He wasn't a bishop or anything like that. Pizarro was the conquistador for the Incans in Peru. The rest of the people are quite holy. Junipero Serra, though, was not a bishop. He was a Franciscan. He was in the New World. He worked in California very famously, setting up the missions there. It wasn't Serra. Now, both of the following guys fought against slavery very famously. Peter Claver was one of the famous opponents of slavery, and he worked a lot, especially with the African slaves. But the one who was the bishop of the New World and knew Columbus and also fought against the slavery as it was unfolding was Bartholomew de las Casas. And by the way, A, B, and D are all, well, A and B are both saints. Junipero Serra is considered a blessed. Alrighty, next slide here. Question number 2. Boy, I hope this is working. Who saw the vision of Our Lady of Lourdes? Was it A, Juan Diego, B, Bernadette Soubirous, C, Joan of Arc, or D, John Vianney? Who saw or who experienced the vision of Our Lady of Lourdes? Juan Diego, Bernadette Soubirous, Joan of Arc, or John Vianney? Let's get rid of some people. It's not Joan of Arc, not in this chapter. Yes, mystical visions and things like this, or definitely at the very least voices, but not Our Lady of Lourdes, even though Our Lady of Lourdes is in France. John Vianney, also French, but there's not per se a famous set of visions with John Vianney. It's not him either. Now, both of the remaining two were famous for a vision that they saw. Juan Diego saw the vision of Our Lady of Guadalupe, though, in Mexico in the early 1500s. It was Bernadette Soubirous, the young French girl who received the vision of Our Lady of Lourdes when Mary declared herself to be the Immaculate Conception in 1858. Question 3. Who is the father of modern philosophy? Who is the father of modern philosophy? Is it A, Aristotle, B, Voltaire, C, Blaise Pascal, or D, René Descartes? Who is the father of modern philosophy? Aristotle, Voltaire, Blaise Pascal, or Descartes? René Descartes. Well, modern philosophy is relatively new, so it's not the most ancient guy on the list, Aristotle. It's not Aristotle. Nor is it B, Voltaire, either. Voltaire is famous for his revolutionary writings promoting the French Revolution, but it wasn't him. Now, both C and D are famous mathematicians. Blaise Pascal was actually a Catholic and a heretic, though sort of towards the end, but he's not per se famous for his philosophy. The father of modern philosophy, the guy who posed the question and introduced skepticism, especially into philosophy, was Descartes. Descartes was the man I think, therefore I am. Question 4. Which heresy was it that believed that God's grace canceled free will? This has to do with predestination. But what was the name of this heresy? The heresy that believed God's grace overrode a person's free will or canceled their free will? Was it Jansenism, Gallicanism, Quietism, or liberalism? Which heresy dealt with this? Well, it's not D. Liberalism isn't per se a heresy. B, Gallicanism is the heresy about France being greater than the church and things like that. So it's not B either. Quietism is just kind of allow everything to happen to you. This isn't the heresy involved. The heresy involved is A, Jansenism. This was the very popular heresy in France that taught or advocated a sort of Catholic version of Calvin's predestination. That God knows who's going to heaven or hell. He's giving you grace. You're either going to follow it or not. He's going to give you grace, and if he gives you grace, you have no hope but of following it. You have to follow God's grace. There's no way around it. Jansenism, like Calvinism, was a very strict religion. This is what Blaise Pascal believed. And there is your answer. Question number 5. Who was the bishop, the Catholic bishop, appointed to Geneva? Remember, Geneva is entirely Calvinist by this point. But who was the Catholic bishop who was sent to begin the conversion process of the people in Geneva? Was it, and we see a lot of Francises here, was it Francis de Sales, Francis Xavier, Francis of Assisi, or Francisco Pizarro? Which one was it? Well, it's definitely not Francisco Pizarro, who was a conquistador. Sorry, I just needed another Francis. That's why we have that one. Francis of Assisi was very good, but it wasn't him. He started the Franciscan order. He was never a bishop or anything even like that. Both of the remaining Francises are of this era. Francis Xavier was the apostle of India. He was the great Jesuit missionary who went out to India with a huge amount of success. Probably one of the greatest converters in church history was Francis Xavier. Francis de Sales, he had good numbers, not as good as Francis Xavier, but Francis de Sales was the man who was appointed to be bishop of a place that was openly hostile to Catholicism. He was the bishop of Calvinist Geneva. The gentleman saint, Francis de Sales, is 5. Question number 6. Who was the Huguenot king who converted to Catholicism? Who was the Huguenot king who converted to Catholicism? Remember, the Huguenots were the French Calvinists. And we have Henry IV, Louis XIV, James I, or Louis XVI. Which of these was the Huguenot king who converted to Catholicism? Well, it's definitely not James I. James I was a king of England. He was not king of France at all. But James I, more importantly, James I was the one who was nearly killed by Guy Fawkes in the Gunpowder Plot, and which left a very bitter taste for Catholicism in England. Now, the rest of the choices are all French kings. In fact, there is a part of the test where I ask you to match up the French rulers with what they did, what they were doing. And all 3 of the remaining people are French kings and were very important for what they did. Now, it is not Louis XVI. Louis XVI is the one who gets killed during the French Revolution. Louis XIV was way too clever to ever get killed by anything like that, nor is it Louis XIV either. Louis XIV is the Sun King, the man who got Versailles to the level of prestige that it enjoyed. Henry IV was the man who said, Paris is well worth a mass. Henry IV was the one who said, even though I'm Calvinist, I'll become Catholic for the sake of the peace of France. Question 7. Which of these dates is the storming of the Bastille? Which of these dates is the storming of the Bastille? Is it November 5th, 1605, May 5th, 1789, July 14th, 1789, or January 21st, 1793? And yes, all 4 of these dates are very, very important. These are not arbitrarily chosen numbers. Well, the one that's furthest away is that first one. November 5th, 1605 was the day of the Gunpowder Plot. That was the capture of Guy Fawkes, and that's still November 5th. Remember, the 5th of November, the Gunpowder Treason and Plot. That's that one. January 21st, 1793 was the date Louis XVI was killed. A very important and notable and memorable date. And while Cinco de Mayo is very fun, that was the date the Estates General actually began. That's when it all was convened. The actual storming of the Bastille occurred on Bastille Day, July 14th, 1789. The major French holiday for their freedom is 10 days after the 4th of July, July 14th, 1789. Question 8. Which one of these persons was martyred by the Mohawks? By the Iroquois subtribe of the Mohawks. Was it Kateri Tekakwitha, Isaac Jogues, Jacques Marquette, or Francis Xavier? Which of these was martyred by the Mohawks? Well, it's not Francis Xavier. Francis Xavier worked with the Indians in India, so it's not him. It's the wrong side of the world. Nor is it Jacques Marquette. Jacques Marquette was the famous French priest. He's not a saint, but he's very famous for seeing and discovering the Mississippi River. Kateri Tekakwitha was a Mohawk. She's called the Lily of the Mohawks, but she was not actually killed by the Mohawks. That happened in the same tribe 10 years before she was born, though, to Isaac Jogues. Isaac Jogues was the man who very famously was tortured in a very brutal manner, escaped, and then returned to the Mohawks. Question 9. Hurrying as fast as I can because I have a C period who's getting grumpy. Who was the cardinal who changed the course of the 30 Years' War? Who was the cardinal who changed the course of the 30 Years' War? This would be the French cardinal who decided to side with the Protestants against the Catholics for political reasons. Was it Richelieu, Robespierre, Newman, or Fox? Well, it's definitely not Fox. That's Guy Fawkes from the Gunpowder Plot. Cardinal Newman was a very holy man who brought Catholicism back to England. It's not him. Both of the remaining guys are French. Robespierre is one of the architects of the French Revolution. That's significantly after the 30 Years' War. The cardinal who did that was the incredibly clever politician Cardinal Richelieu. Going through the remaining of these. Pope Pius, I will ask you a question about the Pope Piuses. Which Pope Pius ruled the longest, called the First Vatican Council, upheld papal infallibility, and decreed the Immaculate Conception? Was it Pius the 6th, 7th, 8th, or 9th? 6th, 7th, 8th, or 9th? Which Pope Pius did it? Well, it's definitely not the 8th. The 8th does not enter too much into our history class. Pope Pius the 6th was the one who was kidnapped by Napoleon and died in captivity. Pope Pius the 7th also was the one who was kidnapped by Napoleon and but was freed. It was Pius the 9th. All right. 2 questions remaining. Here we go. And my C period's walking away. Mr. Brem's just talking to himself. Who is the social contract thinker who thought man was inherently good? Who is the social contract thinker who thought man was inherently good? Was it Locke, Hobbes, Rousseau, or Copernicus? Which social contract thinker thought man was inherently good? Well, it's definitely not D, Copernicus, who was the famous astronomer. It was not Hobbes who thought man was pure evil. And it was not Locke either. Locke thought man was a mixture of good and evil. The answer is C, Rousseau. Question 12. Waiting for it. Just trying to queue up. Which of these did Galileo do first? Which of these did Galileo do first? Was it A, did he first hypothesize heliocentricity? B, did he invent the telescope? C, did he observe moons of other planets? Or D, did he prove geocentricity? Which of these did Galileo do and do first? Well, he did not invent the telescope. You can only invent something once first. It wasn't him. He did not prove much of anything, especially not geocentricity. He was against geocentricity. Did he first hypothesize heliocentricity? No, that was Copernicus before he was even born. Galileo was the first, though, to observe planetary bodies going around other planets, moons of Jupiter. Okay, and that was the thing he did first. I hope this has been very helpful. Hope you guys do well on the test. I hope you have a good Thanksgiving. Goodbye.